Hello, sociology scholars. Mrs. Olson here. Today's lesson is titled Patterns of Conflict and falls within our unit Inequalities in Race and Ethnicity. The learning target reads that you will be able to explain the three basic patterns of racial and ethnic conflict. Always a friendly reminder at the beginning, it's a good idea to take notes, so whether that's with a piece of paper and a writing utensil or to take notes digitally. Okay, so here we go with the first slide. That it was really just introducing you to the three basic patterns. The first one reads that sociologists have identified three basic patterns that dominant cultures take when they reject minorities. So essentially what this is saying is that these three patterns of conflict, it is when the majority, who typically has the power and control in society, they are denying access to what society has to offer with minorities. Okay, so sociologists, they have examined historical records and current events to determine these patterns of conflict. The first one is subjugation, and as you are going to see in just a minute, that subjugation has two subcategories of it that we will be talking about and providing examples for. The second one is population transfer, example with that one too, and then genocide is the most extreme form of these patterns of conflict. And while I won't be showing any pictures of the acts of genocide, I will be giving you examples of those. Okay, so the first one, subjugation, the definition reads that it is the process by which a minority group is denied equal access to the benefits of society. So with subjugation, it is the most common pattern of the three basic patterns that we see throughout history and then also now. There are two forms, and so we're going to have several slides that talk about these two forms. The first one is de jure segregation, and the second one, the name is de facto segregation. A few photos to represent de jure and de facto. We are going to talk about the definition of de jure in just a minute. And then here is one that you're going to see again. You're going to see the same picture again that represents de facto segregation. Okay, so the definition of de jure segregation is the denial of equal access based on the law. So there is a law written down, it was passed, that reinforces this denial of equal access. So de jure segregation, it ruled many aspects of daily life in the United States during the latter part of the 19th century and then the first part of the 20th century. And the civil rights movement, it helps to break down the laws that fall underneath or fell underneath de jure segregation. So the first one that broke down de jure segregation is Brown versus the Board of Education. Now, if you've taken a history class, a U.S. history class, you most likely have come across the landmark court case of Brown. So really, since this isn't a history class, this is a sociology class, we're just using it as an example instead of studying it like we would in a history class. But the summary really is that the Supreme Court ruled that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. It was illegal. So you can then make the assumption that before Brown, before this landmark court case, in the United States, it was okay to separate the races in schools. So often what you found was that there were black schools and there were white schools. And before Brown versus the Board of Education was passed, the two did not mix. The two groups did not mix. So that's one example of de jure segregation. The reason why it is a landmark court case is because it dismantles de jure segregation in the United States. Another example are the apartheid policies in South Africa. You can see the years there from 48 to 94. And what these policies did was to put severe limitations on the Black majority and then other non-whites. So this one is actually an interesting historical case, interesting in the aspect that the white population in South Africa was actually smaller than the Black population. You can see that in this part, the phrase is Black majority, because the Blacks outnumbered the whites in South Africa, but it is the whites that had much more power. And so they were denying equal access to things in society because they're the ones that had the power and because of racism, prejudice, and discrimination. Okay, so these pictures represent de jure segregation. Remember that the law backs it up. So, of course, this is an old black and white picture, likely from the 1940s, maybe early 1950s. This is what classrooms looked like back then in the United States with the separation of the races, where you had all white classrooms, and then, of course, you would have black schools. But this is what Brown did, in that it brought the groups together. Okay. All right, so moving that again. So we're going to move on to de facto segregation. And the definition of this reads that it is the denial of equal access based on common prejudice. So the big difference with de jure and de facto segregation is that de jure has a law to back it up, whereas de facto segregation, it is happening, it is instituted and implemented by large groups against smaller groups that don't have as much power. So the term de facto describes an effect that is real, although it is not based on law, and then of course that denial is still carried out. So some examples of de facto segregation are neighboring homeowners. So you might get a group of people that own their own homes, so a bunch of people in a neighborhood. They agree amongst themselves not to sell to certain members of other ethnic groups or races. So let's just say that in the 1950s, 1960s, you might even find it in today's society. I hope not, but you might. So you might have a quote unquote white neighborhood where the majority of the families are white, and they say that they are not going to sell to any kind of minority. Anybody with any kind of brown in their skin would not be able to buy a home in their neighborhood, even if they had the money and the means to be able to do that. Okay, so that picture is supposed to represent 1950s, 1960s, the idea of de facto. So this laundry company is only going to wash for white patrons. They are not going to do laundry for anybody else. So there's not a law that backed this up, but people support it. And of course, the business owners carried it out. Okay. More information on de facto segregation, more examples. This says that people of certain backgrounds are denied promotions because of widely held stereotypes. So I'll give you a modern day example in just a second. This was the same photograph that was on the introduction to subjugation, which is what de facto and de jure fall under. And it says, we want white tenants in our white community. So this actually comes from after World War II, Japanese Americans trying to come back into society because they were really removed from U.S. society because of racism and prejudice. Okay, more on subjugation. In the US, both de facto and de jure discrimination have been made illegal by civil rights laws and rulings in federal court. Now, under these protections, discrimination is illegal. And these discriminations include discrimination that is based on race, color, sex, disability, religion, familial status, or national origin. So all of those varieties fall underneath the protections that are legal underneath the eyes of American law. Okay, so the system of de jure segregation, it has been dismantled because of these protections. The difficulty of proving bias means that de facto segregation still persists. Now, without bringing up specific examples in this video lesson, there are modern day examples that are actually happening right now as I make this video that could be considered could be examples that de facto segregation, it still exists. Okay, so this is the one that I mentioned just a minute ago, in that it is happening right now. So this video is made in 2020, the pivotal year 2020. And the caption that I put here says that the former mayor of Las Vegas, it was a she was accused of racial discrimination, and she made the comment to a city councilman that she was not going to promote that monkey. And so that monkey refers to denying a police chief, who was actually the deputy police chief at the time to be police chief, happened to be African American. And so if people say that de facto segregation does not exist, well, there are cases that have evidence that show that it does exist. All right, our next slide is titled Population Transfer. And what happens with population transfer is that the powerful majority is making a minority move, essentially. So they are removing them from a location that most likely they have lived in for many, many years, and they are moving them out of that area to usually a remote location. So they want them kind of out of the way of what they deem as the society that they want living there. Examples include Native Americans that were forced onto reservations at the turn of the century, late 1700s, in the 1800s, that's when this happened. In the 1990s, Yugoslavia carried out ethnic cleansing. So Yugoslavia was broken up into ethnic states, and the Serbs were the controlling majority, and they did not approve of Muslims in their country, and so carried out ethnic cleansing to remove them from their population. So this is a map to represent Native Americans being forced onto reservations. So you can see that the green, it says Indian lands before relocation. And of course, this is only a very small portion of the United States, the southeastern part of the United States. Here are different Native American groups that were moved from their ancestral homelands to all be put onto Oklahoma or Indian Territory in the late 1700s and 1800s. And then this is another one to give you an idea of this relocation piece associated with population transfer. This is the former country of Yugoslavia. You can see that there, of course, are different colors representing populations, different groups living in Yugoslavia. These are the different ethnic states that Yugoslavia was broken into: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Montenegro. The purple represents Serbs. The red represents the Croats. The green represents Muslims, okay? And then I'm not going to read the rest of the map for you, but there are more groups that are involved here. This map shows you that where the Muslims were at pre-war, pre-1994, I believe it was, 1994, it does not look like that after ethnic cleansing in Bosnia. Our last slide is about genocide, which is the most extreme form of the patterns of conflict. The definition of genocide is the systematic effort to destroy an entire population. So systematic, this isn't a word to overlook. There are laws in place. There are actions taken to get rid of an entire population. And it doesn't always start out as a killing action. Sometimes it is removal of a group of people. Sometimes it is taking away their rights and freedoms, and then those actions build up to the getting rid of, the killing of an entire population. So examples that we are going to discuss are the Holocaust, which you might have come across in a different history class. And to sum up the Holocaust, it was Hitler's campaign which eliminated 6 million people from Europe. Another historical event that is considered genocide is the rape of Nanking. This is the Japanese invasion of the capital of China, which was Nanking at the time, and its purpose was to destroy Chinese resistance. So this figure may look a little bit strange to you, 260,000 to 350,000. Why don't they have an exact number? That is because some people were murdered, some people were brutalized and then were killed, some women were raped and then murdered. So they don't have exact figures, but they do know that this many people disappeared, were gone because of the rape of Nanking. And then the last one is the Rwandan massacre that happened in the 1990s. And so Rwanda is a country in Africa. The majority group in Rwanda was the Hutus, and they slaughtered 500,000 to 800,000 of the minority Tutsis. Why, you might ask? Because of prejudice and racism. Okay, so... Oops. Okay, got it. And so this is where I'm going to end this slideshow to give you, it is a political cartoon, not meant to be funny in any way, but to send a message about the different genocides that have happened in history. All right, everyone, this is the end of Patterns of Conflict. Please let me know if you have any questions.